I hope you're happy campers. I learned yesterday that in Greece, life starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I'm really, really pleased that so many of you are joining me for this session at 9. Good work. I'm going to take you into discussion in a little while about how we get our linear radio channels to survive when we want the audience to move with us into our smartphones, into the apps. And I will be joined by a distinguished panel. They are currently sitting down there, but they will soon be up here. I'm just going to kick this off first for a while. And let's start with this. Let's see. Here we go. Who knows what this is? Hands up or shout out. Nobody. We are in Greece. Okay, this is Aristoteles. He said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellent, then, is not an act, but it is a habit. And why do I bring it up today? Well, because we have something, most of us in here, we have a habit. We are working for companies that has been around for a very, very long time. My company, Swedish Radio, since 1925. We are celebrating 100 years this year. And our habit has been to give the audience ordinary linear radio stations. We know how to do this. And in the beginning, actually, they were so much live that when I today go down to our archives, I can't find a single recording from the early days. So much live were they. And since then, they sort of transferred into being more of pre-packed programming. And now it's definitely the time to bring it backwards again. Because the linear radio stations, they need to go much, much more live. If you ask me, in the future, live audio will be our spine. I'm coming from a country up in the north. It's very cold. We usually have a lot of snow. Many of us go skiing. We know how fatal it can be if you break your spine. By saying so, what I mean is that we really, really have to take care of our spine. If we don't get the linear radio listeners with us into a digital and global market, into the smartphone, we will never, ever have such a high reach that we have today. Not only by giving them podcasts or, for instance, news clips. Podcasts are extremely important, but that's not the only thing we need to nurture when we go into a digital competition. And the competition in a smartphone, as we all know it, is huge. We are competing for time. We are competing among each other, of course, for the audience that want to have linear radio or that want to have a podcast. But we are also competing with audiobooks. We are competing with music streaming devices. And we are competing with sort of everything else you can do in a smartphone. For instance, social media. And at the same time, as I said at the opening session yesterday, we also see new players when it comes to audio. For instance, in Sweden, all the newspapers, more or less, are producing a podcast that you can easily find in a smartphone. And then this is also coming, and that will definitely change the landscape. Generative AI is here to stay. So we have to, once again, remember our origin. And for me, our origin are the linear radio stations. And why do they have to become more live? What's in it for the consumer? Well, first of all, if you ask me, they have an irreplaceable charm. I think you have, all of you, been in the situation where there are breaking news, and you go into a live broadcast, and you're automatically, immediately taken to the scene of action, and how thrilling that can be. Or if you are a sports fan, like I am, nothing is better than to follow, for instance, the last weekend's skiing in Trondheim in Norway with your headphone on, listening to a live sports broadcast. Or if you are a music lover, all the live music that we give people when we are broadcasting live. Also, when you are listening to something that is live, you're truly also able to be present in the moment. You can still drive your car. You can still go running if you have time. And you can cook your dinner at Friday evening without having to take your eyes off the pots. And if you ask me, I'm pretty sure that this will also take you out of your filter bubbles, because you will definitely hear a voice you wouldn't have heard otherwise, or a perspective that you didn't know that you wanted to get. Do we have to stick with the old channels that we already have? No, we don't. We can start new ones. In the UK, for instance, they have just recently launched numerous of linear live radio stations. And of course, in the beginning, they thought that they were going to cannibalize on the old ones. That didn't happen. These channels are now living there perfectly in harmony. So, are there any threats against this? Of course there are. Also, those are numerous, but I will only give you 3 that are quite obvious. News fatigue. Very many of our linear radio stations that are live do focus a lot on news. And we can see a tendency today, let's see where it's going to take off, that people are sick and tired of the world that they are living in, that the war that is going on everywhere, that they get all these kind of frantic news that they don't feel really good about, and they simply might turn off. And if they turn off, the recipe is not to only play music, because you all know that since years back, we have had a huge competition from music streaming devices if our linear radio stations, the live linear radio stations, are only focusing on music. And then once again, the AI-generated content is already here. We already see channels that are 100% done by computers. And by these computers, you get a host, you get your linear station, you get your music, you get your news, and you get your entertainment. And it's not a single person that is even involved. And of course, if the audience will think that this is good enough, that's going to be a huge threat against our core business. And then we have this generation, because some of you might think that linear radio is only for oldies like me. I think you're wrong. At least in Sweden, we have captured those who are between 20 and 34. We can see that they are in growing numbers, not only listening to podcasts, but also to linear radio. And now we are trying to focus on Generation Z, those who are between 13 and 28. Where will they take off? Well, we can see some trends. One, of course, those, you all know them, that are always online. They have their headphones on, earplugs in 24/7. They are already attacked to generative AI. AI is their best friend. They chat on ChatGPT almost every day, every minute, and they follow the advice that they get. And for them, Wi-Fi is like the air we are all breathing. If you try to take a 15-year-old in Sweden to a Swedish summer house, a cottage, and you don't have Wi-Fi, most likely you are going to fail. But at the same time, we see these. We see teenagers that are tired, they are depressed, they are psychologically unstable, and many of them actually start to say, well, maybe this is because I'm online all the time. Maybe this is because I'm following my friends on social media 24/7. Maybe this is not good for me. So they are trying to minimize their digital consumption. For them, offline is really the new online, and they are seriously trying to detox themselves from social media. Let's see if this is going to be a huge number and where that will take off. But we might, in the future, have a digitally divided audience. And we have to cater for all their needs. So far, we're doing great, if you ask me. In Sweden, we have 10 million people. 7.4 voluntarily listen to content from Swedish Radio. That's quite okay, 80% of the population. They listen to podcasts, numerous of podcasts, but they also listen more and more to linear radio. We can see growing numbers in 2024 compared to 2023. And these are not the old linear radio stations that we had 5 or 10 years ago. We have done a lot of work in reshaping these channels to be more competitive when we want the audience to go with us into the smartphone. One example, some of you might have heard this already, is P3. P3 used to be a channel focusing on young adults, 20 to 34-year-old, like very many stations in Europe. The presenters kind of pretended to be young, and we could see a channel that was truly on a downslide. The audience figures were going down every year. We decided we had to do something. So we did extensive research, we did surveys, and we came up with a conclusion. Our aim is now to make a channel for people that have the same needs, not the same age. And the needs are music, a lot of music, but also music journalism. It is culture, it is entertainment, it is news, and also, once in a while, a thorough, in-depth interview. So since some years back, the channel now has no age as their target group, only people with the same need. The presenters are really, really genuine to their audiences. They are like buddies that you want to hang around with. And people hang around with them both in the linear listening time, but also on demand and also on social media. So it's kind of an ecosystem around these presenters. We try to make the channel constantly live because we think a podcast is a podcast and a live broadcast is a live broadcast. And that makes the channel much more authentic and much more relevant. And if you ask me, it's a success. And I know I'm biased, but it is a success. The audience figures have gone up, and especially among youngsters between 20 and 34. So when you don't say it's for them, they're definitely coming. Another example, we have 25 local radio stations. Sweden is a very long country. Some years ago, we invented this little backpack that you can see here on the picture. That makes it possible today to broadcast without being in a building, in a studio, and without a bulky mixing console, to be honest. And that has made our local radio stations much, much more visible out there. They are much, much more present where people actually are. That gives the audience totally different voices and totally different perspectives. And today, the local radio stations are always on the field. At least one reporter are always on the field. And we have 25 of these stations. We are broadcasting 240 hours of local content every day, and most of it live out there where people are actually living. And also 20 to 34-year-olds love this channel. So this is also a way of how you, with linear radio, can reach a younger audience. Then we have our a little bit kind of more highbrow channel. We call it P1. They have primarily news and current affairs and culture. They have no music whatsoever. Also there we can see that if we take out the pre-prepared scheduled program and replace it by breaking news, but not only by breaking news, but also by bringing an extra current affairs program next to it, where you sort of put the news into perspective, we can see that the audience figures are going up. And we are also trying to get the morning show and the show in the early evening to be broadcasted much more outside of the buildings. One example is from the horrible, horrible school shooting that we had in a town called Örebro a month ago, where the morning show actually left Stockholm in the middle of the night and placed themselves in Örebro, broadcasting live instead of staying in the studio. That made hell of a difference, if you ask me. And as you can see there on the photo, the presenter had a chilly experience, not only by the very awful thing that was going on around him. This is by means Sweden, so it was cold in the morning. And also, when it comes to our international coverage, we think that that's being done best on the ground, and therefore we have the largest network of foreign correspondents of all Nordic media, because we try to be present when something is happening, broadcasting live. So, what's next then? Well, you have to get these live linear radio listeners into your app, but then you want them to stay there and find other things. This is a very good example, I would say, from our colleagues in Norway, from NRK, where they just had the World Championship in skiing. They decided, some of you might have heard this already yesterday, they decided that they would have their whole conversation with the audience through their own app. And that was a huge success. A lot of more people were actually listening in to the live broadcast because this was an extra added feature. They could chat with the journalists. And also, you could see that more people were downloading the NRK radio app. So this is one way of building extra features to your live linear broadcast that you can do if you get the audience with you into the app and they don't stay in an ordinary radio receiver. Another way is, of course, to make them aware that you are actually broadcasting live out of scheduling by push notifications. And a third way is to, for instance, add an extra layer. You can have a quiz going on live in your app while they are listening to a live radio broadcast to give some extra flavor to what is actually going on. I think that all of you, all of us, should during the day today also then talk about what is the next step in this. How do we make the spine even more unbreakable in a linear world that is going digital into the app? What if, for instance, you enter your car, you put on your radio station, you get your news, and you automatically, in front of you, also get a map where you can see where the news are taking place. Or you enter into a live broadcast, but you missed the beginning, and you automatically will get a script with a summary of what has been said before you entered into the morning show. That could easily be done, I think, by AI, an AI-generated agent. Many of you might have this today. We don't at the Swedish Radio. In that case, bravo. But I think it's something we should also talk about today. How do we take this further? So, don't forget, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellent, then, is not an act, but it is a habit. Linear radio is here to stay. You have to nurture it. It's not the same linear radio that you historically had. It has to be developed, and it has to go more live, because live is our spine. I'm going to end there and ask my distinguished panel now to come on stage for a further discussion. We have Alexandra, we have Jonathan, and we have Laurent. Please take a seat. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to start asking you, Alexandra. If you look at the Greek radio landscape, it's very much live and kicking. Why is it so?
Yeah, it is. That's true. There's 45 radio stations here in Athens alone for a population of nearly 3.8 million. And that's because there's a lot of good choices. 95% of this population listens to radio weekly, and that compares to 21% that listen to podcasts weekly. So why is Greek radio, live radio, that important? One is Greek language and culture. Even if you see the top 5 radio stations here in Greece, they're all about Greek content and Greek music, so there's a strong bond. The market has not been that contaminated by American culture. So yes, obviously there's research and playlists, but not to that extent. And then that allows for even more unique content, like having a kids radio on FM, or having 5 like eclectic radio stations like your NPR and your FIP and Nova, just in Athens alone out of the 30 commercial radio stations. So there are many good choices to keep people within linear is the first start.
Yeah, you mentioned actually already the kids radio station. Why did you start a kids radio station? Everybody's going for podcasts when it comes to that generation.
Right, so investing in the next generations of listeners was very key, but basically this came when I became a mom myself, right, in 2016. I couldn't believe there was not a radio station for kids or content geared towards them, right? So everything was too busy, too loud, too fragmented. And my gut was saying there was a need in the market, but there was also a need in the industry. But everyone would say it will never work. That kids' radio makes no money, that kids don't know what radio is, and that it's too niche for advertisers as well. Fast forward, 20 months after its launch, it actually was #1 in the entire market for women 33 to 45, with a weekly reach of 15%. So, and mostly we actually managed to hit our key qualitative targets, right? And that was screen-free environment, which is a very strong point for kids of that age. So audio is very important in radio when it comes to screen-free entertainment, and then having high quality and content. So taking radio as you know it and teaching it to the next generation is key.
So this is a good example on not just sticking what we already have, but also start new linear radio stations. What would you say then, Laurent, what's the current trend when it comes to live radio in France?
Oh, hi, Cilla. Hi, everyone. First of all, I think that if we want a bright future and live as our spine, as you said, we need to face the reality. I don't know how it is in your markets, but in France, it's very bad. The linear radio is going down since year 2000. I know it's pretty early, but if you agree, let's focus 1 minute on like an exercise I'm going to ask you. Just imagine 2 curves starting a generation ago, year 2000. The first curve is raising continuously since then till today, 50% higher. My second curve, starting also a generation ago, year 2000, and going down continuously, divided by 3 within the same range. My first curve is the total listening hours of the elder generation. My second curve is the total listening hours of the younger generation, namely the Gen Z. So really, the first 2 takeaways for France people, I don't know how it is in Sweden, but if you want to grow your audience, your radio audience, you better target the older generation. Nobody says that, but I needed to say it. The second takeaway is if you want to address the younger generation, and this is important, well, we need to take a step aside. As someone say, we need to think differently.
But have you given up on the younger generation when it comes to linear radio?
No, we're doing good.
You're doing good. you still haven't sort of said, this is not for you, this is just for grandma.
Mm-hmm. That's for the market. It's not for Radio France. Yeah, we improved the live experience, first of all, with things, as you mentioned, to improve what the listeners have when they're online and when they're on their digital experience. We added like subtitles for the hearing impaired people, time shifting. Well, I did a great experience leaving my room at the President Hotel. I had 18th floor to go down, and I could listen to the radio without any network during these 18 floors. That's because we have technologies that help doing that, and that improve the listening of the radio. We have live reaction, interactivity, vocal notes, stuff like that. One thing I really do like, and that's about music and data when we listen to music, our Radio France app can tell you exactly the track that you're listening to when you're on demand or live. You can put it as a favorite in your list, and you can export it to Spotify. So we need to add really practical features so that the experience of listening radio is even better than it used to be.
So it's getting improved in the player. How about the BBC then, Jonathan? When I talked to your predecessor about BBC Sounds when it started, he was very, very firm on that BBC Sounds is not for linear radio, it's a podcast player. How is it today?
Well, so you've got 2 parts to your question, and I have a slide later if we play it, which will sort of show how we intersect with live. But I think the first thing to say is that obviously the sort of live radio market is robust in the UK. 87% of the population tune in weekly. It's over 1 billion hours. For the BBC, commercial radio has had a stellar year in terms of its digital reach and share. You need to remember that Sounds is one of 2 things. It is building on the legacy of iPlayer radio, which came before it, which is about creating the digital future of our much-loved radio brands. That's always been the reason that it was created. And it literally and figuratively has sounds at has live radio at its heart in the live radio dial, which sits at the very, very, very top of the app on the homepage. We have 12.66 million hours per week of live radio listening, but we want that to be more. And our focus, and I appreciate there is language around podcasts which can feel quite evangelical. My background is as a digital sort of content strategist, and I come from that background rather than linear radio. But our proposition as Sounds has always been radio, music, and podcasts, and radio is our heart and soul. Now, what that means, I think, in terms of the way that we operate is that we need an incredibly good live listening experience to the stations, and that's not just our domestic radio stations, that's CBeebies Radio, that's World Service, that's all of our local radio stations. But also, we need to be thinking about what our digital planning is with our live radio stations, whether that is working with Helen Thomas and Radio 2 to maximize the access that we have on something like a Eurovision, thinking about on-air coverage, then on-air votes and interaction and participation, leading then to an on-demand after the event occasion, which Scott and Rylan will be fronting, through to something as simple as smart speakers, where there's a 27% share of the market in the UK. And actually, for many people, across all ages, that is the new version of listening to radio. So how are we making it easy for people to listen on smart speaker? I think when you also think about podcasts and linear radio, for me, they go hand in hand, because when you move to something like speech radio, where there's been an under 45 crossover for the number of adults in the market who are listening to podcasts versus live speech radio, you have to think about a content catalog that cross-pollinates and creates journeys of discovery between the two. So when we're thinking about our speech slate is made up of network brands, catch-up radio, origination, taking one-offs in the linear schedule and placing them into umbrella feeds so that they can basically be consumed as podcasts. And actually, it cuts across all ages. And finally, on the podcast point, for me, it's just part of an ecosystem. There is a bit of threat there. There are 13 million adults in the UK who now listen to podcasts. I think it was 10 million last year, so it's rapidly growing. 1 million of them have never listened to live radio. And 30% of them are under the age of 35. So for me, it's not about distinct strategies, it's about interrelated strategies.
True, and when I listen to all of you, it's kind of linear podcast, they have to go hand in hand, we have to find crossovers, also because we can't afford to do separate things, to be honest. Yeah. So we need to think about the content in the first place and then try to kind of maximize it in different way of distributions. You wanted to come in?
Yeah, basically it's what you said in your speech. You spoke about different needs. So I view it the same way. It's all an audio ecosystem, but it serves different needs. So if I were to attach a word to each one of them, radio would be about community and companionship, and podcast would be about discovery. And then you see that streaming is about mood management. So again, the heart of the ecosystem is linear radio, but the other ones serve different needs. And I think if we take it opposite, we might say Generation Z has found their need in discovery with podcasts, but maybe we need to teach them better how to find the community companionship that radio offers, that listener-presenter relationship.
Yeah, can I add something?
Absolutely, go ahead.
We discovered that linear radio is a good advertising for podcasts. But on the other hand, podcast is also good advertising for linear radio. So for France Inter and France Culture, they grew all together.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? How do you interact between the two so that people do understand what you're actually doing?
Maybe you can put my slide on, because...
Do we have a slide? Then we'll have a look at the slide. Let's see if we can get it.
Yes, because you have screenshots of our Radio France application, and you see how we make up listener journey between live radio, on-demand, and on-demand, a channel and another channel, and so on. But actually, the listener journey doesn't start here, because the people that are coming to listen to us, whether in podcast or linear radio, they probably know us already, and we want to address also the people that don't know us yet. So we need to be good on other platforms as well, like the search engine of Google or YouTube, or also Instagram and other social networks. And on my slide that is not coming, I wanted
Hopefully
to show
it will
you
be coming.
an example
I asked for it, let's see.
of what we are doing on social networks that are taking some parts of the radio shows or podcast shows. That's the most beautiful slide, you know, the black one.
Yeah.
The black slide, please.
We're all
Here we
branded.
go.
We've all been
Need-
branded quite clearly. You can tell.
Yeah.
This is whose.
Yeah, the brand is pretty clear here. So the Instagram example is on the left of this slide. Yeah, you can take picture of that, but you can also download my app. That will be good for my fingers, thank you. And you can also check our social networks accounts. So on Instagram, we take parts of the radio shows, maybe 1 minute, 30 seconds, or something that is related to the show, but that is not directly an extract from the show. We put some pictures on it. Pictures are not easy because we're a radio, so it can be a shot in the studio or pictures taken somewhere. And on this example, you can see on the top of it that it says the name of the show, where the message is coming from. So it gives to the people the idea that behind this cool video, where you learn something or you have a good moment with it, it comes from a radio called France Culture in that case, and from a show called, I can't read it, Esprit des Lieux. So maybe with one video, nobody will click on the radio and go to listen to it. But after a week, after a month, after years, after seeing maybe tens, hundreds, thousands of videos, they are most likely to listen to us.
Can you then take this, I know because you are a thinker, I know you. If you take this even a step further into the future, what will the next thing be to attract young people to listen to live linear radio?
Yeah, I really believe, as you said, that linear radio is our spine. And what we're doing is inventing the body, the flesh and blood that are going around. And the body and flesh of today, meaning Google search engine, social networks, etc., are good for today. But really, for your question, maybe I'm a thinker, but I don't know what the future will be. I can ask my AI, but probably AI will help us to find new ways to the public, because the discovery by public that are way too much on their screens will be our challenge.
I had 2 examples in the beginning. What do you think, Jonathan? What is the next step in all this?
So I just forgot to mention, I would say, in terms of sort of the BBC offer, and if we sort of go to my first slide, what I sort of outlined was, that sort of captures it all. One of the things that I really forgot to talk about was streams. And streams in sounds relating to potential new stations. And those new stations essentially being very focused on younger audiences. So, slide 28, by the way, I can see it. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see everything I outlined, which was sort of our existing stations. And then in the bottom, the live and on-demand content catalog. And then there is, of course, some OD first commissioning, which I sort of will, this is not what this panel is about, which essentially is about sort of targeting audiences where they are, cross-platform. But you can see Radio 1 Dance, Radio 1 Anthems, and Radio 3 Unwind in the top right-hand corner. And really, those are a response to the vast expansion of commercial radio in the UK, where we have had over 50 brand extensions in the last year alone. And the BBC hasn't been granted, since charter renewal of 22 years ago, to be able to expand to meet the need states, occasions, more music, less speech occasions that younger audiences are looking for, and that intersection between music streaming and live radio. So that is in response to that. And if you move to my next slide, we are taking that forward into thinking about speech categories like news. So you said that there's news fatigue, but there's also like a lack of news comprehension. And when something breaks across the BBC, you have to move in a channel-hopping way. So this is the first time ever that a 24-hour news stream, first time in 100 years for the BBC, the live radio-like experience has been created from a mix of content that comes from both radio, television, and online. So there are some really interesting occasions. This was the first time ever in audio for the BBC that you could hear back-to-back local radio interviews for the Prime Minister as they moved from station to station getting barraged. You could only hear it here, back-to-back. It's a place where after the Today program, going into the Today podcast, Nick and Amal were able to do a live Q&A post Today wrapping up about Trump with a community who are highly engaged and want to hear it in that way, which is very informal but incredibly informed. And finally, for those stories that just come about and you have to be in the room, it's the first place that we were able to do a listening court segment for the verdict on the Southport killer, which wouldn't have been anywhere on our linear radio stations, but is here in this 24-hour news stream. So for me, that intersection of live and digital and innovation, and about how we can meet our gaps and find occasions, is how we will future-proof live radio and just make a much richer experience in our apps that will bring the next generation of listeners.
And is this already out there?
Yeah, this is out there. It was put together in 2 weeks by a very talented team called the Digital Audio News team, who also make all the radio bulletins. And it was done because the election was called early.
And how has it been received, audience-wise?
It's been received really well. I think that we need to be thinking about its presentation and its discovery, because I think a lot of the issues that we have as broadcasters are around the complexity of our content catalog and offer, especially in public service media, where there's such a broad range versus commercial. So it's been received very, very well by news junkies, and it's been received very, very well, I think, by people who want to be seeing innovation in radio. The next step for us is to think about how do we take it to audiences who don't know about it, who aren't considering it, and realize they can fit it into their life.
So, Alexander, what's the next step for you, would you say?
To build on what both of fellow speakers said, if we put that slide on. So we have an example. We work all our brands that way, but Kids Radio Plus is a good example of the next step. So we took what is very strong on linear and made a subscription version of it that has kids' audiobooks, kids' podcasts, and another, as you said, 30 radio stations, linear, that teach kids about rock music. We actually use our Red FM presenters to teach kids what rock music is, who Slash is, then world music. There's even white noise for babies. So it's catered towards the needs of the parents that are actually selecting this product for their kids. So again, maybe the challenge here in Greece is subscription, because it's not a very subscription-based country. But again, we build something around the needs and an ecosystem where linear is the key, but then it keeps you within there with your podcasts and your audiobooks. And another thing I wanted to mention is it's very important what Laurent said about bringing, especially to Gen Z, so beyond Gen A, where they are, they listen to comedians, influencers, podcasters. And the way you bring them on linear is also important, not just to put them there, but the promo you do. So for instance, we did a promo for a very well digital known guy, so an influencer, podcaster, and we knew they would never hear that he's going to be on radio. So I wanted to say he just landed on radio, on NLFCO, which is a radio station. So we actually made him skydive, because that's digital viral content, and then he landed on our radio station, right? So we have to use the language of digital, which is viral, a bit shocking, I mean in a good sense, right? And bring them over. So
That's why I'm not an influencer. I wouldn't do that.
And I don't think that anybody in 1925 skydived on the top of Swedish Radio. But so that sounds like a super idea. We also talked about another threat, or I did in my presentation, which is kind of a live radio station done by only a machine. Do you seriously think it's going to be a threat, or do we have some advantages here that we should nurture?
It is a trend, I think, within creative industries. The position of the BBC is incredibly careful. The application of it to public service broadcasting needs to be thought about incredibly meticulously. There's a central generative AI team at the BBC who published some guiding principles, which I believe were the sort of first in the market to sort of lay out sort of fair use as it relates to public service media. I mean, we're thinking about the public, we're thinking about presenters, we're thinking about people behind the mic and their careers and the creativity that they sort of have built over the years. And we're thinking about being open and transparent about our use to audiences, because audiences need to know where it's been used, even if there's a human in the loop. We're conducting a number of pilots across the BBC, from operational efficiencies through to creative application, to learn about its capabilities. And that in-house team will be looking at the outcomes of that and working out whether we can scale that and communicate that to the industry. But we're being very careful.
And Laurent, Alexander, what do you say?
You want to go?
No.
Okay. So its main role is to speed up the production process. So I view it more as an augmentation strategy for supporting our jobs in creative, marketing, playlist, ad replacement, and so on. So it can help there. But we have to remember that the more digital we become, the more human we must be. And at the heart of radio is the listener-presenter relationship. And that's something AI can fake, but so far I haven't seen it do it in a way that we know how to do it. And that is obvious to the listener.
I totally agree. I think that it's going to be a key value in the future, authenticity of radio, authenticity of voice. We shouldn't play with that, and I'm sorry for the AI radio guys here, but I think we shouldn't put on air fake radio, AI radio. We can use AI as an helper, but we shouldn't put on air synthetic voices to cheat on the public, actually.
Yeah, well, the position on IP ownership is totally unclear, right? Like, as a sector. So the risk involved that it is too high. If there's a ruling one way or another in the next couple of years about IP ownership and sort of rights management, and it cuts the wrong way for people who basically embed it in their business, it could be disastrous. So, if anything, that's a business reason for not going gung-ho on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the Swedish Radio, we have taken also a decision that the voices that you hear should be authentic, because we think that sort of helps to build our trust even further in the future, where people want to know that the person who's talking to them is actually a real person that they can rely on. So we're all in the same position, I think, but also that's why I think that the linear radio stations have to go live, because after all, the AI linear radio stations are not going to have reporters out on the field broadcasting live with a backpack. You need a human being at least to be present on the ground. And I think we should be much, much more outside of our buildings, much, much more present on the ground, and then leave the pre-packed programming to the on-demand consumption as of podcasts. So if you now, we have 3 minutes left, so you get 1 minute each. If you look into the future, what is the biggest thing you would say would help the live linear radio to survive? Alexandra, since you're the lady, I start with you.
Yes, so it's again that focus around linear radio. Well, there's something we keep on forgetting and not talking about, but it's very obvious, but it's key, which is radio is a lean-back medium. And maybe we should lean into that lean-back medium, that advantage that radio has, because basically we sit and research our target audience, we curate news, content, music for them. And there's fatigue, as you said, in doing your own playlists and your own music. So that is an advantage we can bank on. The second thing would be what we keep saying about bringing personalities that are on different medium, digital influencers, podcasters, comedians, on linear, and smart ways to bring that crowd over. And the third is be where they are, right? You said it as well in your presentation. So it's key things that we sometimes keep forgetting because we're talking about podcasts and AI. And there's a bit of the do it better, but go back to the basics as well and invest in the next generation, both A and Z, to teach them the things that we all love about radio.
Thank you. Laurent, now she took 15 seconds from you, so you only have 45.
No, I don't need a minute to say. I think that's our key value for the future, what we can bring to the public: curiosity, discovery, authenticity, as we just said. And I think that we will succeed if we can deliver trust and pleasure.
And Jonathan.
Internally, when you're thinking about Gen Z, Allard, who was on the stage yesterday, said how they consume is inconvenient for radio creatives because it is outside some of their frames of reference. So the first thing internally is don't assume that you can export the creativity that has worked in some cases for 100 years for the next generation. Challenge your modes of thinking and how you would reach them, but remember your heart and soul, obviously, editorially. Externally, distribution, and the routes to market. We've not talked about in-car, and we're about to run out of time, but there are battlegrounds which need to be won for people to build that live listening habit.
Well, thank you, all three of you, and thank you to the audience. And never forget, without great content, it doesn't matter if it's linear radio or if it's a podcast. The content is still the key, if you ask me. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, Laura.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was a great start to the day. You've sort of set the agenda for all the key issues, I think, we're going to discuss later in the day. And I think a very optimistic panel. Thank you, Cilla. Thank you, team. Fantastic. Really enjoyed that a lot. So we have a short break. Back in here next, still with young audiences. How do you show live music? How do you share concerts with young audiences? The new MTV Unplugged, that'll be in here. And then after that, it's Greek morning shows. What can we learn from the very best of Greek morning shows? You have about 10 minutes to decide where you are. The coffee's outside if you need that. See you shortly.